Well, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Collision Live. It is me, one of your hosts, Daniel, and I am joined at the desk, as I always am, by the sweet, sweet taste flavor of Peeps to my perfect Pepsi drink, Mr. Samuel David Camp. What is up?
Have you had a chance to revisit that Peeps X Pepsi collab?
I should say, do you need to ask? So I have. My first sort of plunge into the perfection that is Peeps Pepsi was good, but I was super, super sick. So I had like cough drops and like cough medicine in my mouth. So it diluted the flavor a little bit. So I did kind of give it a fair chance. And it was even better the second time.
That's disturbing.
And you know what will probably be even better? The third time.
I saw some Peeps on the shelf in the grocery store as we are nigh on the Easter Sunday. And thought of you, but not enough to buy them for you.
Hey, well,
I just can't.
There's still time to.
I can't encourage that sort of sinful living. But hey, we all have things.
Proof that there is a loving God in heaven that loves his children. So go try yourself a Peeps Pepsi when you get the chance. But hey, we're excited for you to join us and talk about things beyond our perfect drinks and beverages, and just interesting cultural stuff. A lot of stuff going on this week. Kind of interesting stories that are maybe stuff that we haven't necessarily talked on a bunch, and kind of things going on that I think as Christians either we can learn from or just be aware of or dialogue about. So I encourage you guys, if you're watching us live or even if you're watching us later playback or listening to the audio podcast, send comments, jump in the comment section, have a conversation about these things as we kind of walk through some of this as Christians. But there is some interesting stuff, so why don't we just get right into it and kick things off like we always do with cultural conversations. So the first kind of major newsy cultural story that is kind of making headlines in the last couple of days is that cinematic universes, they're all the rage. Everyone has them. Everyone wants them. Marvel kind of pioneered that. DC tried with slightly less success.
Mixed bag.
There's the MonsterVerse, the ill-fated. Had about one movie, but it had big plans before all that fell apart. Sort of everyone, even like the Star Wars shows are very much like, like it's the Book of Boba Fett, but there's also Mandalorian 2.0, and we're actually sitting with the Ahsoka, and like it gets trying to sort of all interconnected stories are all the rage these days. Well, there's a new one coming. It seems a cinematic universe of biblical proportions.
I see what you did there.
You see the BCU, perhaps we can call it. So this thing is kind of coming out of a PR announcement, an interview that just happened. That a former, let's see if I can get his name, a former executive of DreamWorks, Mark Soren, was just named the president of production for the popular faith-based series on the life of Jesus, The Chosen, which just seems to be exploding and kind of expanding its reach, as evident by hiring a president of production for that show. And he did an interview with Deadline, kind of talking about why he's coming onto the show and sort of what his role is, and what sort of won him over the vision of The Chosen. Kind of near the end of the interview is where I think things get kind of interesting as he more kind of casts a vision for what's coming. So why don't I read this quote, and then we can kind of get into, is this good? What do we think about this? What does this mean? So speaking to Deadline, he says, "When you look at the Bible, not to sound crude, but it is a universe. Not to describe it as a Marvel universe or a DC universe, but it is a universe with iconic figures and characters, and I include the Old Testament and the New Testament. There's a desire to tell a lot of different biblical stories, all of which are primal stories that have been told in one fashion or another, but have never been told specifically as they relate directly to the Bible. There's a sense of ever-increasing bandwidth for us to tell other stories that are about the Bible. So I think my role and my title suggest a bigger universe and suggest the desire for The Chosen Inc. to delve more into that." So kind of the translation for that is that the BCU, the Bible Cinematic Universe,
it's around the corner,
is coming. So what are your thoughts? Are you excited to dive into this? Are you?
Well, I think we've talked about this some before in the past, and part of me is very excited because I think there are a lot of rich stories and a lot of even more than just stories, like just taking stories from the Bible and making it into a movie or a show. I think the more interesting thing is planting stories with a biblical context. Like, so stories maybe about, one of David's mighty men or something. And so you have a lot more freedom in the narrative and the story that you could create, but you're not having to fill in the gaps on like an actual biblical story, which can leads to the other side of how I react to this, which is a little concerned just because anytime you put biblical stories on screen, you're going to have to do some creative gap filling, and that can oftentimes maybe be detrimental to how people view the Bible, I think, as evidenced also by the popular Chosen show. And so, I think there's a lot of cool things you could do, and I think maybe have a little caution as you do them.
Yeah, I think it is a complex. Like, I know probably the initial response is like, just yay, more Jesus, more Bible stories. Like we need more. And I think that's a valid response. Like I think, like you were saying, like there's so much potential.
Yeah.
And I think like it's in some ways it's crazy that we haven't told these stories yet in film. And like
it's surprising that it's sort of taken this long to kind of, I think, realize the potential of storytelling,
which is sort of like one of the, like, maybe the unsung like successes of The Chosen is like obviously the show itself is super popular and lots of people enjoy it, but I feel like it is sort of elevated the genre to a way that like has credibility where you can, and like the storytelling, like filmmaking capabilities and talent and like all that kind of, and this like the infrastructure of like how they release and make these shows, like it's sort of allowed all of a sudden to like make, the BCU like a more legitimate vision and not just like, maybe like 10 years ago and there's still a bit more of like a stink for like, it's going to be one of those like, it's a movie on the life of the Apostle Paul and with the production value of like, Third Baptist Church down the street and that small, like it's, like a church play. Like it's like, no, like these are actually shows. You can do a lot. And I said we covered this at the Collision in an article, and in that post, I sort of say like, we sort of talk a lot about like the golden age of TV, but like it's almost like we haven't realized like how much like the golden age of like faith-based films and like content is coming. Like there's been so much lately that's just better, kind of better quality. But it is going to be interesting because like I know The Chosen, like I said before, I'm somewhat mixed on The Chosen. I'm not necessarily one of those people that like, thinks it's like evil or like that it's like, The Chosen is, destroying the faith of, the integrity of the Bible. I'm not one of those people, but I do at least sort of want to sit up and like take notice of like what happens when we do have like a BCU and like so much of the Bible is available in like a kind of a dramatized form, and obviously with creative license and things that like, how much of sort of our it's sort of like a modern version of like Paradise Lost, where like a lot of things that we believe about the Genesis account, we don't realize actually comes from that poem and was made up by Milton. It's not in Genesis, like, but we just sort of assume things about who Satan was and like the apple and like all these things that aren't biblical necessarily. It's sort of more speculism. Like, so what happens like when we have like so much of these Bible stories and like they're sort of filling in gaps and creating characters and adding motivations and like it's like, is that good? Like you can see both sides. Like people that aren't necessarily going to read their Bible, but then like they get introduced to this world and it becomes alive. Like I think that's what I hear a lot with like The Chosen, is like you sort of read the Gospels and it's all you ever really get is like Jesus teaching, but like the show sort of shows like the relationship. Like he was joking with his disciples. He was also human. Like they did more than just preach. Like they walked, they journeyed, they tried, and you sort of those stories become more alive. Like so you can see that positive sense.
It brings context, I think, which I think is important to those stories and to Scripture, which I think is good. But again, like with any of those kind of things, like there is always going to be a creative license, and I think it's interesting because like we'll talk about Dungeons and Dragons later on in the show, and we've talked about movies before or shows that have like magical, fantastical elements, and how there's always been pushback with with that from the church, and it's like, hey, whoa, like what is this magic and wizardry, and I don't want my kids watching that, which is fine, but you probably hear close to zero pushback from a show like The Chosen, because it's like, it's a show about Jesus. Like, what's like, of course my kids can watch it and it's going to be great. And there's almost this lack of critical thinking when it comes to viewing things that, on the surface at least, confirm like your beliefs. And I think something like The Chosen can be much more impactful, for better or worse, on someone's theology than a show like Dungeons and Dragons or a show like Harry Potter or movie or book or whatever. And so I think can sometimes just be like way too much consternation about wizards in a fantastic movie and not nearly enough about, depictions of biblical characters and what effect that may play on how you form your theology. If that
I think there's maybe critical is the wrong word. I don't think we need to be like, I guess I'm gonna watch the next episode of The Chosen, and I got my notes, and I think because like the church has been since the beginning of the church, has been using like the stained glass windows and like the statues on the out, like they've always sort of like, how do you make, and again in that context it was like an illiterate culture that couldn't read the Bible. It was like all in Latin, so like they found ways to like for the community to like be immersed, like so it's sort of like a part of our heritage of like how do you sort of, for a culture that isn't necessarily going to go to the Bible themselves, like how do you sort of make those stories known? But I think you're right, like there is not always a sense of like more critical thing or closer thinking of like, does it change, like what once if now in the back of our mind there's this one very vivid depiction or like creative license, and like so every time we open the Bible, like that's what comes to our mind, like because like obviously we all speculate and stuff, and we all fill in the gaps on our own when we read the Bible, but there's something potent about like a captivating visual thing, like because even like I think like paintings and stuff have sort of depicted scenes but not narratives, like so it is sort of new ground. But hey, I don't know, I think it is cool. I think there's so many stories that I think like biblical accounts that could just totally come to life in like a new way, like just following like a Hebrew slave through like the Exodus, like tons of like season-ending moments you can have in there, and like and just sort of what would that wonder and like the questions, like what would some of those like actually have looked like for these stories that we've read so many times that like we lose the wonder of like, oh, and then they're part of the Red Sea, we know that story. It's like, no, like that would be terrifying, like if you were there, like there'd be so much to that.
Well, and I think to me that's the exciting part, is like being able to sort of put some drapery on the stories of biblical times. I think especially like the Old Testament and the New Testament as well, but and to put context to some of those stories, I think in a way that you can be creative, but you're not necessarily kind of fiddling with the actual biblical stories. But it's like, here's a story, like you said, about a Hebrew slave. I just think that would be really interesting, and you could do a lot with that. And maybe adjacent to that is this guy Moses comes onto the scene, but it's not necessarily like Moses' story. It's really just someone living at the time when, Moses starts confronting Pharaoh. Like, I just think that's super rich, and you could do a lot with that without necessarily running into the sort of icky depictions of Bible stories. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's sort of like I think on the whole, short is like, I feel like it can be such a powerful tool and method, like, and because it's so powerful, we should also be extra careful to like how we think through that and process it. It can have good impacts, it can have bad impacts. But something that is definitely having most people would say bad impacts, but some people, even unexpected people, might say is having a good impact is TikTok. So TikTok's been in the news a lot. For political reasons and stuff right now.
And national security reasons.
I have my own personal grumpy, I'm too old for TikTok kind of feelings towards that social media platform. But I came across, maybe it was yesterday, sort of an unexpected story of TikTok from an unexpected source, and that is the Rolling Stone. I will admit, I did not have the Rolling Stone featuring a article on Christian content creators and TikTokers on my bingo card for the year. That's not
Certainly a surprise.
that's not where I usually go to for my like Christian faith-based news. I wonder what the Rolling Stone is gonna, what positive things they have to say.
Yeah.
But hey, give credit where credit is due. So Rolling Stone, they just released an article that I stumbled across kind of by accident called "How 3 TikTokers Used God to Find Surrealism." And it's sort of this feature on this trio of these. They're all like in their 20s. These content creators that make this bizarre, like hilarious, but like the weirdest sort of videos that I just keep you guessing and go kind of, they're constantly throwing things at you and just getting weirder and weirder, and they're just sort of to like entertain. So this feature kind of, it seems like they went to like investigate these videos because these guys are like, they've amassed a massive following. Like, the videos have millions of views, and like the content creators themselves have like millions of followers. So it seems like this Rolling Stone person like just went to find out more and like discovered in the process that all three are very devout Christian, like outspoken Christians, and the article does well. Like it doesn't shy away from that like you might expect. And kind of like, even like in the end of the article, it kind of gets more specifically into like their faith aspect of what they do and kind of who, where they find their identity in, and like, kind of each of the three creators like gets a chance to share some of their testimony. Like I think one like grew up as an atheist and then kind of through some like anxiety issues and stuff like found peace in God, and I think one of them like grew up Christian but sort of fell away a bit, and like I think because of this other friend of theirs like got reignited for like was on fire for God and what they're doing, and like they even kind of shared it was sort of through praying and stuff that led them to even start exploring this weird kind of TikTok videos. And I don't know, it's just sort of like I don't know what all there is for us to get into with it, but it's interesting in one sense just because I'm always interested when like a very like a secular big major publication is like giving a positive depiction
tells a not hit job on a Christian creator, or
where just it lets them share some of that, and it doesn't like seem like it's like condemning them for believing that. But I think it also just is like a reminder that like there's lots of ways for Christians to use creativity and outside of like the traditional BCU type ways that we sometimes think. But what do you think? Are you?
Yeah, no, I mean, this was a very unexpected story, and I did watch some of their videos, and like they're hilarious. I think it is a very specific sense of humor, I guess you could say, which I happen to have. Like, it totally is in line with what I find funny, and there's an unexpected nature of like every video. Like you think it's going to go this way, but it's just something completely bizarre, but it just kind of keeps going. And I don't know, I think they're brilliantly done, and obviously a lot of other people think that as well. And so I think what's cool about it is that they're Christians and they're doing like very non-Christian art. It's like they're not necessarily, and I have obviously not watched all their videos, but from the few that I did see, it's like they're just sort of everyday situations that are just kind of turned into just bizarre scenarios that are just pretty funny and unexpected. And it's like, and that's an okay thing to do. And I think as Christians and as the church, I think we should be supporting more of this kind of thing. And I think it's just very refreshing to see these sort of artists come up and just do the thing that they love and are really good at it. And so I was really impressed by it all.
Yeah, because it's almost like and again, not to necessarily conflate the two exactly, but like last week when we talked about Bella Ramsey and like how people kind of jumped on her for like saying like her faith is quieter. Like, I mean, she's not just making like worship themed YouTube videos all the time. Like,
yeah, she has been a little busy. Like making hit shows and such.
And like, who knows where she is in her faith, but I guess that came to mind with this, where like, I feel like from like the outside, as like Christians in the church, like we can have this expectation that like, if you're going to be like a creative Christian, you're going to be like engaged and like present in the culture, that like, you got to do that.
You have to be, well, I think, you have to be the spokesperson for Christianity suddenly. Like if
and
you're,
even just their content, like, it's like, it has to, it has to have like some like biblical evangelistic, like everything you make has to like, that's your chance to like, that might be your one chance for someone to engage, encounter the gospel, and like you need to not miss those. Like where like I feel like we aren't always as open to like these guys, where it's like they're just making weird videos that could be made by anyone, and yet it's given them a platform, and like it's like they have this like network of people that they engage with, and they're Christians, and like they can. There's other ways to like be a Christian in the culture rather than just like publicizing Bible studies every week.
Right. And, and I think that's the sort of unique thing about, I think, Christianity in the arts is that there is this sort of underlying assumption that if you are in the arts, that you have to somehow be especially vocal about your faith in your art, whereas like no other profession has that expectation. Like plumbers, electricians, engineers, doctors, no one, I mean, obviously, like if you have the opportunity to share your faith, you do, but like no one is saying like, well, you should really have like a verse on your, above the mantle of your dentistry to show that you're like nobody's saying that. Like people are just saying, be the best dentist you can be because you're a Christian and everything you do to the glory of God. And so, but there is this weird sort of like, but if you're making art, then, there's this sort of almost extra layer.
Because even like the way we talk about it, we talk about like Christian artists, but we don't talk about like Christian, car repair. Like,
right.
Not that they aren't Christian, but like we don't include that as like, they do that in a Christian way. Like even if they do it, we're like, for an artist, it's like, I'm just an artist. It's like, well, are they a Christian artist or are they like a regular? We draw that line way more with the arts, kind of missing the fact that like, you can have an impact just by being in that culture and like relating to people and like sharing your testimony in Rolling Stone when you get the chance. Like there's so many other creative ways to do that. Not that that we should like be hesitant to be vocal like when you get the chance. Like
certainly
it's not about like, well, if we just need to go like undercover and like if people don't know we're Christian, then maybe like, because like that I get that, that cop out of like, but as far as like sort of this quick judgment of like, well, unless your videos like end with like a, this was a weird video, but what's not subjective is the love of God. Like unless we like make it it's like you can still have an impact. But I don't know. Check out their if you go to our the collision.org, we'll have an article on that I think later today. We can like find their TikTok videos if you want to sort of see the madness, or else just look up the Rolling Stone article, because it definitely is. I think it is interesting to see Christians doing sort of unorthodox kind of ways to be immersed in culture.
But speaking of unorthodox,
and things that are definitely of interest, and some might even say slightly surreal. The next segment of our show, we have Host Corner. So this is, I'm going to use my chance to get something off my chest that it's kind of shocking that I have not done this earlier, because this is a conversation that me and my wife, my poor long-suffering wife, we go through this probably every single week of our married life. And that is what I think is one of the most overlooked problems in society. And that is the way that we do drive-thrus, fast food drive-thrus. They're slow. They're always backed up. It seems like companies are always like trying to find ways to speed it up and like, make it go faster. But the most obvious way to do that, which just seems like even a child should spot that, is to have more than one sign. So the way most drive-thrus are set up, you have one menu and it is facing completely sideways, so that you literally cannot see what the restaurant has to offer until you are at the thing being asked what you want. And then everyone says, well, 1 second. And then we take 10 minutes to look at the menu while a line forms behind us. And all of that could easily be fixed by simply adding another menu down the road. There's a long line, one that people can actually see before they're giving their order, so that when the car rolls up, hey, we already know because we saw a sign. We don't have to wait till we are literally like 5 feet from the menu. So this thing drives me crazy forever. I've told my wife if I ran for president, this would be my campaign platform. It seems like and I've even looked it up. Like one of those signs costs $3,000. So like, this isn't a big commitment. These companies are making thousands and thousands of dollars a day for their drive-thru. They would make double that if they actually let people see the food before they got to the menu. So I don't know about you, Sam. Have you ever found yourself like sitting in a line saying, like, I don't know what I want? Like, you know, especially as a dad, like you have a car full of people.
Yeah,
Your kids don't know.
I would totally back you up on this campaign platform. Like, I think it's absolutely absurd that like you don't have a menu prior to like ordering. That seems insane. Like that is like the definition of insanity, is like expecting people to know what they want before they see the options.
Yeah.
Like how are we expected to live in a civilized world where that exists? And I see, there's lots of problems in this country. I think it could maybe all be traced back.
I think
to this
it's sort of like money is the root of all evil. Like this is definitely. Oh, my poor wife. Like literally every time we get to a drive-through, I start my rant of like, what would be nice right now if we could like see what's on that menu up there.
Well, and as someone who like rarely does a drive-through, even more so. Like I even went to Chick-fil-A, which is probably like the top, at like the fastest drive-through that a guy can go to. The problem is like I have no idea what's on the menu. And it's like I pull up there and the person's coming at me, and I'm like, I'm not even close. I can't even see a sign. Like, and sometimes I'll have to just ask, and maybe they have like a little menu there or something. But it's like, come on, people, like get it together. Like
I know. You just know, like what?
Who just knows what they want at a drive-through? I don't know.
Because I even went down the bit of the rabbit hole of like I think about 60 to 70% of sales from fast food places come through drive-throughs.
Yeah. Why is this like? How is such an obvious fix to such a simple problem not
and like even like McDonald's I think 2 years ago did like this extensive restructuring of their drive-through like system and like how they make it behind the scenes, like, and they celebrated that they shaved an average of 20 seconds off of times.
I bet you could cut times in half.
It's like
you just put a menu up
instead of like trying to figure out how to make the burger faster.
And here's the thing about this, because if you put it down the line like way before you get in up to the speaker thing, you could have a car parked there looking at the menu, and you could have another car who says, I know what I want because I stop here every day. They could just avoid that person who's having to decide, which would be me, and they could just go in front. And it's like, hey, like it's just the exponential cutting of time at a drive-through is just it's almost impossible to overstate.
Yeah, it's very much like when they finally made like flat bottom tacos, where it's just like, why didn't no one ever think of that? Like tacos, they fall over. Like just make it flat. Like it's one of those.
You make an entirely new utensil to hold a taco rather than just make it.
So that's my I needdeed to use this moment because my wife.
I'm really glad you did. Daniel.
I feel like I've pounded that drum too many times with my wife that I just feel like she doesn't receive my message.
Oh, I'm receiving it.
She's a little. She sort of shakes her head.
Wholeheartedly agree.
Say next time you go to the drive-through, just sit there as you're waiting in a long line and thinking, you know what would be better? The person, the car ahead of me, knew what they were ordering before they got to the menu. Yeah. But hey, that's just my own grumpiness. But speaking of things that also can make people grumpy and people have had maybe equally passionate opinions on, and that is Dungeons and Dragons. So this is a kind of somewhat of a topical thing, although it's a larger issue, but it's one that's like got brought back up. Because the new Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves, kind of the movie adaptation based on the popular role-playing game from the early 70s, which
isn't that game where people like lost track of who they were and like went on a killing spree or something?
Well, that seems to be the case. So this has always been a controversial thing, like even Stranger Things. Did you ever watch the new Stranger Things?
I did actually. Finally,
they kind of they've always played
after it came out.
Hey, better like than never. They've always sort of played off like the game of Dungeons and Dragons, but the last season like kind of dramatizes some of the like satanic panic of it, like where the church is very much like how they viewed people that were playing. Like this is like the gateway to the occult, and people are gonna lose, like it sort of embodied those fears. Like we're going to lose sight of humanity and go on these killing sprees. And so I thought we could kind of get into it because I don't know exactly how, like if it's sort of like a tired controversy now where people have just sort of moved on. There's new things. Like, again, it's been a controversial thing since like I think like the 70s when the game came out. But because of the new movie and like it just seems like it's having a resurgence like with Stranger Things and like D&D has become probably more popular right now than it's ever been.
Yeah.
Even from when it started, and like becoming like maybe more mainstream beyond just like the hyper geeks at high school or whatever. Like
stereotypical D&D player.
Like it's become more where you even have like like big, like macho celebrity guys, and like they're hosting their D&D channel and stuff. Like it's become more mainstream. So then we kind of get into that. Like, is it something that Christians should be concerned of? Is it all overblown? Again, like, I don't want to necessarily like diminish the fears or like some of those concerns, but I do think it's something that we should think honestly about. Like,
yeah. Well, I mean, as someone who's never played the game nor seen the movie that's coming out tomorrow,
look at what a good Christian you are.
It seems to me that it is one of those things where like I think there's maybe a bit of misplaced fear in something like this, that like this is a way to play a game and do storytelling, and I think it seems like it engages a lot of your senses and creativity, and it's a communal thing, so you play with your friends, like, and then the movie is obviously playing off of those aspects of the game. But I don't know, like, someone who is not well versed in this and didn't grow up playing it, it seems somewhat of like just some overblown, like maybe there was some fear mongering back in the 70s when it came out, and then like that's sort of the latent memory that people of a certain generation may have towards D&D, and it's one of those things that's like, I don't know that there's really anything there to
I feel like the fears, if there is like concerns with it, again, my personal opinion is that I find it a harmless kind of communal thing. Like, I don't have problems with D&D. I didn't grow up playing D&D, and it's not like I'm like hardcore. I have my group there. But like I know people that have, and we've sort of dabbled in it with my kids, like a watered down kind of adapted version because they're so young. But I feel like when there is concerns, it's based on like two things. Like, one is the role playing aspect of like you're pretending to be someone else, and like at what point, if you get so immersed, do you forget who you really are? Like, there's sort of that part, and then there's obviously it's set in like this fantastical magical world, and like magic, and like you're role playing someone who's like using magic. Is that sort of like, have you crossed the line between like going against what the Bible says, like dabbling in the occult? And there's kind of those two things. Like, I feel like the first one of those, like the role playing one, very much does seem like, to me at least, sort of like leftover, like sort of like a folklore thing of like there's sort of these like I was telling you beforehand, like I sort of place this in the same category as like the church cliche where pastors are always like, and churches have literally divided over the color of the carpet, and it's like every time I hear that, and you hear it all the time, I want to be like what churches, like what's the name of that church that literally divided, like, and because no one can name one, like no one actually knows a church that divided literally over the color of the carpet. Like, this is one of those, like, that's 30 years ago or something, like some pastor threw that example out and someone else heard it, and then someone else heard it, and like now we just sort of all accept that, I guess churches must do that.
Churches are so petty.
My pastor said that they did, or this person said that they did, like, so I guess that must be true, that churches divide, even if none of us know. Like, I feel like a lot of like the folklore of D&D, like the role playing thing of like, because like I've even heard some of this like recently of like, but didn't a bunch of kids like, they lost track of reality and they thought they were these warriors, and they went and like, and did like acts of violence, or like they just like lost their mind, and like it's like, what kids, like what, like sort of where does some of that come from? Like, because like role playing, like we don't feel the same with like when a kid plays like cops and robbers or something, or like when a kid plays like pretends that their stuffed animals are talking. Like role playing is a natural thing that like, even at a young age of like 3, we accept that like this kid knows the difference between fiction and reality. Like, they don't expect to watch Winnie the Pooh and then go talk to a bear. Like, they know that those are different things. Like,
I mean, I think the role playing side of it just it does seem a bit overblown, and it's like, so like, are you also against video games and against plays? And it's like, there's so many ways that we role play. It's like, I don't think that like that seems like a really specific application of role playing. It's like, well, this role playing is different than all the other role playing that you do, and so that's why we need to be concerned about it. So I don't know, that seems a bit overblown. And then I think, again, like with the more like occult side of it, I think it's probably similar to people's fears about Harry Potter, and so it's like, well, it's a fantasy, like it's a made up world where you make up stuff, and some of that stuff is like magic and dragons and whatever else. It's like, again, that's sort of separate from like, hey, we've got a Ouija board, or we're gonna dabble in the Wiccan religion now, and so let's all get together and do that. It's like, no, this is a totally separate thing, and it's storytelling, and it's using these tools of fantasy or magic to tell those stories. And so that, again,
Yeah, it's kind of conflating the like there, like someone that's in the occult, like the actual occult, isn't like trying to shoot like ice bolts out of their hands, or like
yeah,
like summon a dragon, like like how the actual manifestations of like the occult and like dark spirituality and stuff is very distinct from what you see in like like this Dungeons and Dragons movie of like where it's just like silly spells and like this character can transform into an owl bear, like, and they can transform into a deer, and like that's not a cult. Like someone in the occult, like the actual real world occult, isn't like I can shapeshift into a squirrel. It's like no, like they're communing or trying to like with like evil spirits and Satan, like, which is very different from like this fantasy of like where that is sort of this like the backdrop, like the world building of like just have imagination. What if we could do this? What if we had these sort of powers? Like not necessarily that we believe that these are real. It's just that those are fun. Like, so I don't know. I think I get more of that as Christians. Like the role playing thing to me seems like it's built on sort of these like myths that have just been around forever and no one's ever questioned that. Like, like a kid can just that's 4 knows the difference between make believe, but like someone that's 20, if they on Saturday nights pretend to play as a wizard, like they might think they are a wizard. It's like, well, no, they won't. Like they're if they do, then like the problem is deeper than that. Like there is issues of like maybe they'll think that they're a goblin thief. It's like no, they won't. Like we can distinguish that like even at a young age. Like that part to me, I think is based on like ignorance or folklore. The magic I do get, like I don't have a problem with magic and like fictional magic and like the fantastical, like this, like I love Lord of the Rings and fantasy and like even like some of like the mythology, like that's like my jams. Like I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah.
Like, although I do get why some Christians might be like, maybe Christians shouldn't be involved in stories that do that. Like so I kind of get that, but I think sort of as this sort of boogeyman of like D&D is like the enemy and like I don't know. I feel like I would hope that sort of like as Christians and stuff, like we've sort of advanced beyond where we can like, not that you necessarily all Christians should like, and instead of Wednesday night Bible study, start a D&D group. Like, not that it means like everyone should be on board with it or like it, but at least beyond like the sensational, like knee jerk, like, oh, that's that thing that's satanic, and like, go a little deeper than that.
Yeah. Just do a little research on it and find out for yourself, I think, than just believing the headlines.
Yeah. So do you want to start like a D&D group?
Sure. Why not?
We can get into that. But hey, let us know what your thought is. And maybe too, if you've been more, like if you've played the game and been more involved in that, let me know your thoughts, kind of what draws you to it. Like I do think it can be a very fun, communal like act of like engaging creativity of like telling these fun stories together, which is I think is what more the draw is rather than even the thing itself. It's just like it's a communal experience. So let us know your thoughts on kind of how you navigate that, and also encourage you to check out. We were able to do a review in advance for this D&D movie, which I really liked. One of my favorite movies of the year. Hopefully that doesn't bring me a bunch of hate mail and hateful comments, but I actually thought it was a really fun movie with a very kind of hopeful, optimistic tone. So that comes out today. I think is the first public showing. So go check that out, or if you're interested, or check out the review if you're not sure. But kind of final thoughts here. Things kind of going on. Again, check out that review. I got a few other things coming up. We did another review that we have coming for a movie called On a Wing and a Prayer. This is like an Amazon original. If you have Amazon Prime, you have access to this movie, which I think is
April 6th, I
April
think.
6th, Easter. Or is April 6th Easter?
No, it's the Friday before, or Thursday before Easter.
For sure. I thought it was coming out. The Easter season.
Yeah.
I think it's very much trying to hit that faith-based audience. Again, we got a chance to see this movie in advance, so we already have that review ready to go. So it might be one that people are curious to check out. And as always, I encourage you guys to check out thecollision.org. Got a ton of different articles and stuff. kind of some of the stories like we talk about here, but maybe more in more depth, and some stuff that we just don't get to talk to. If you sort of want to just keep up with what's going on, but you have any final?
Well, I would say, speaking of the Collision, this is volume 3 of the Collision. It's just sort of a recap of the year's worth of articles, the ones that we felt were worth putting into a book, part of our anthology of the Collision, and it is for the year of 2021, so we're a little behind on that, but that is also available. You can find that at blackabystore.org. And
so are you implying that if that's the stuff that we felt like was worth getting put in a book, that you're implying that some of our stuff that I do is not worth being put in a book?
No. As I'm just saying that you have to decide what goes where. There's only so many
pages.
pages.
You got to filter through the rabble, the trash to get to the good stuff. And hey, maybe that's why the book is so short. But encourage you to check that out, though. It is a fun book that, although it sort of is from articles that we've done in the past, I think it is timely still, and it sort of gives an overview of just what does it mean to engage with culture, kind of like we do here at the live stream. So check that out. Go to our website. You can order a copy for you and your friends or your enemies, however you so choose. But we will say, too, we won't be here next week. We're gonna half of us will be out of town for various reasons, so we won't have an episode next week. So don't miss us too much. But we will be back the next week with a double dose of stories. So encourage you to check us out the week after on Thursday for our live stream. But thanks for joining us today. Excited to always have you join us, kind of engage with culture. And stay safe, guys. Have a great week, and continue to collide with your world for Christ.